This is Shopify Masters, the e-commerce marketing podcast for ambitious entrepreneurs. It's powered by Shopify, the easiest way to sell online, in person, and anywhere in between. To start your free 14-day trial, visit shopify.com. Hey entrepreneurs, my name is Felix and I'm the host of the Shopify Masters podcast. Each week we put out podcast interviews with successful e-commerce entrepreneurs or experts to give you inspiration, motivation, and actionable tips to increase your traffic and sales so your store can generate the sales you need to live the life you want. On the last episode, you heard about how KnoxLabs.com validated a business using just a splash page and how he's made $2.9 million in 2015. On today's podcast, we learn from an entrepreneur that took a very pragmatic approach to choosing his niche and how you can be successful even if you're not passionate about the product itself, as long as you have a passion for business. In this episode, you'll learn how to prepare when you're thinking about making the jump from the 9-to-5 job to working on your business full-time, why it's critical and what does it mean to add meaningful value when you're dropshipping, and how to create content when you don't know anything about the industry yet. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Udarian, founder of RightChannelRadios.com, eCommerceFuel.com, and the eCommerce Fuel podcast. Right Channel Radios is the number one source for truck and 4x4 CB radio equipment, and eCommerce Fuel is an e-commerce blog and private community for 6- and 7-figure store owners. Right Channel Radios was started in 2008 and based out of Bozeman, Montana. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, thanks, Felix. Appreciate you inviting me on.
Big fan of your work and content for the e-commerce entrepreneurs, and definitely want to get into the e-commerce fuel side of your business in a bit. But let's first start talking about your store. Tell us a little bit about Right Channel Radios and what are some of the most popular products that you sell?
Yeah, so Right Channel Radios is, like you mentioned, a retailer for radio equipment for trucks, Jeeps, 4x4s, focused on old school CB radio equipment. And yeah, I mean, the popular things we sell are really antennas, radios, cables, mounts, pretty much anything you need to hook up a CB radio system in your vehicle.
Mm-hmm. So what's your background? How did you get into selling CB radios?
It's as surprising as it may be, it was not a lifelong dream from a childhood age.
Yeah.
I worked a job out of college for a couple of years in finance, and ended up it's kind of your typical story. You know, you work for the man for a while, worked with some great people, but realized it's not what I wanted to do long term. And so I quit and was exploring a bunch of different options. Didn't know necessarily I wanted to specifically get into radios, but had a hunch one of the things I was exploring was e-commerce. And I spent probably 2 to 4 weeks just really evaluating options and exploring and doing research, and decided on the e-commerce route, decided on radio equipment based on some research I did, and just kind of dove in. So that's kind of the short story of how it worked out.
Yeah, so you had a job already. You sound like a stable job. I think a lot of people can relate to this and wanted something more. So you just straight up one day quit your job without knowing exactly where you were going to land or where you even wanted to land, and were just kind of out there in the field and looking around. What was that moment like? How did it feel liberating, or was it like nerve-wracking? Like, give us an idea of what it feels like to make that jump without knowing where you're going to land.
Yeah, it felt good. It wasn't too scary because I had been pretty good about saving up money the previous couple of years, and was a bachelor at the time, no family, didn't have a whole lot of expenses or dependents, and so I had a decent sized runway, and it was exciting. It's always a little scary when you take a leap and you're like, I have no idea what I'm going to do next, but for the most part, it was pretty exciting.
What would you say if someone asked you for advice on this situation where they are thinking about, maybe not immediately, but they're working on planning towards going full-time into a business, or just going full-time, or just leaving their full-time job like you did and figuring it out? Like, what were some things that you would recommend they kind of prepare, maybe 6 months ahead of time, to make sure that transition is smooth?
Just hoarding as much cash as possible and cutting your expenses. I mean, that may be the obvious one, but I think there's kind of two types of people in the world: people that look at money as a means for buying stuff, and people that look at money as a means of buying like freedom and flexibility and optionality. So I'd really try to do that. I'd also try to learn as much as you can while you're gearing up to quit. I don't necessarily know if the quitting cold turkey like I did is best for everyone. It was great for me. It gives you a real sense of motivation, but there's been a lot of people who have successfully transitioned out of a job with a side hustle or a side project. And obviously that's much less risky, but regardless, the more you can start just going to town on learning as much as possible, reading and getting up to speed on e-commerce and marketing, those kind of things. That helps tremendously. So you don't just hit the ground without any revenue, without any revenue or business, and have to learn everything from scratch.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you to kind of put yourself in that position back in, I guess, 2007, 2008, when you decided to quit your full-time job. Because I think there are listeners out there that have this drive to do something more, start a business, but then don't know they know that kind of where they want to be, but they don't know how to get there. Like, what are the first steps towards moving that direction? So can you give us an idea of how you, I guess, not necessarily decided where you're going to be, but like what steps did you take to expose you to the options that you eventually, chose, which was e-commerce?
It was like, what do I want my life to look like? And it wasn't all about money, because I just had got done with a job that I could have made a ton of money in, but was limiting in a lot of different ways. So I sat down and I said, I want to call my own shots. I want something that doesn't require a crazy amount of startup capital, something that's location independent, that has X amount of potential. And so I wrote out those criteria, what the end result I wanted to be was. And I looked at a bunch of things. I looked at being a freelance photographer. I looked at doing options trading, and I looked at e-commerce. And e-commerce kind of fit, especially dropshipping e-commerce kind of fit those criteria. So after thinking about it and dabbling in all three of those for a couple of weeks and really giving it some time to marinate, I was like, okay, I'm going to go forward with e-commerce. And you never really, I think this is kind of something that's just true in life, but you don't always have complete certainty about what you're going to do. And I think a lot of times people let that stop them from moving forward. But I think the most successful people I know are really good at making decisions with incomplete information or imperfect information and moving forward. You can always backtrack, but so move forward, kind of thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to work with. At that point, I knew it was e-commerce. And so I said, okay, well, what's important for me in e-commerce? Like, what's my goal here? And again, it was just to make a viable business that could buy me financial independence and freedom. And so I took much more of a pragmatic approach to picking a niche versus I have to be in love with this product that I sell. And so I set up some criteria based on some research I'd done online, based on some things that I just kind of intuitively thought, like, want to pick a niche that has a certain amount of demand that's high enough that you can actually make a living on it, but it's not so popular you're going to have to fight with a ton of people. Things like something that isn't easy to get locally, a niche where hopefully you're more sophisticated than the competitors, et cetera, et cetera. And so at that point, I had my list of criteria, and I started brainstorming. And so for probably a couple of weeks, I went through supplier directories, like worldwide brands, walking down the street. Anytime I saw something weird, like, let's say, the racks on the back of a bicycle or motorcycle helmets, I just jotted down. And then I had a list of 50 ideas, compared those to my criteria, and immediately just kind of top ahead eliminated probably 90% of them based on my criteria. I had maybe half a dozen left, and I did a deep dive on those, found the one that, based on some really in-depth research, I felt like had the most potential based on my criteria. And then that was radios. And even then I was like, really? Like, this is really what it is? And going back to that thing about uncertainty, wasn't sure about it, but it's either go back to the beginning or move forward and give it a shot. And so I did the best work I could and move forward with it.
Yeah, I like that. Two things I want to say about what you just said, which was about the uncertainty aspect of it. And I think that's totally true. And I actually had a podcast that was released today, or by the time this comes out, it was released a couple weeks ago, with the founders of Lisa.com, which is the mattress seller that was launched on Shopify. And one of the founders, he was saying that one of the, I think, keys for him for success was to envision the upside of every single risk you take, because we're so conditioned, I think, maybe just as humans in general, but also as business people, to assess the entire situation. And then there's always going to be a reason to say no or a reason not to do it. And I think what separates the entrepreneurs that are successful from the rest of the pack is that they're able to move forward because maybe they're prepared themselves mentally to say, let me look at the upside. Or maybe they just say, okay, maybe the upside's there, maybe it's not, but let's just move forward anyway with this uncertainty, because like you're saying, you can always adapt once you're in the game. You once you're in it, you can always backtrack, and you don't necessarily want to always backtrack, but just having that option in the back of your mind can sometimes help you move forward, because it's that fear of, what if I make the wrong decision? But like you're saying, sometimes a lot of times you can always backtrack and don't be held back by the fear of making like the wrong decision. So I want to say, I really like that point. And the other point was about how The other question that came up based on what you're saying was, you took this really analytical approach, this really methodical approach to deciding A, what you want to do with your life, and B, what kind of products you wanted to sell, which I think I really like that approach. But I'm assuming that at the end of the day, when you're looking at these this list and these criteria that you're looking at, were there more than one great option? And at that time, or maybe you face this today even, when there is more than one great option, how do you choose to focus on just one thing?
It's funny. I trying to remember back, and I remember, maybe it's been a long time to remember what my other options were. I don't necessarily remember there being so many options it was hard to pick. I remember there being so many different question marks and uncertainties and variables that I was like, are any of these going to work? So maybe that's just me being a worst case scenario and kind of seeing the holes in everything. But yeah, so for me, I think the one with CB radios was just, this is the one that looks like it has meets the most criteria, and again, it looks like a home run, but it looks like it might be feasible. So that wasn't really a problem for me so much.
Mm-hmm. So is this an exercise that you think still works today if someone wants to approach this decision of choosing which product to sell, which business to get into, by following what you did? And maybe you can kind of explain like at least maybe a few of the core criteria that you looked at when you made a decision.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways we could kind of take that, Felix. I think in terms of having a list of criteria for getting into the market today, I think that's important. I think that list of criteria has actually changed. So like I started out and still own the business and we still drop ship, but I think drop shipping is getting a lot more competitive. It's getting more difficult. I think Amazon's making it a lot more difficult. Where, let's say 7-8 years ago when I got started, distribution was a big issue. It's what primarily I was solving. That's less of an issue today with Amazon. So you can pick a dropshipping niche, and there's a bunch of criteria. If you want, we can get into those, but I think the criteria have changed, and it's more about today having a great list of criteria where you can pick from a product that you can manufacture, or at least a product line you can manufacture to supplement some dropshipping, and also that checklist be more focused about your customers, your marketing, to a lesser extent the product. But yeah, the way checklists are important, but I think that the specific items are different.
Yeah, let's get into dropshipping. And if you guys, listeners don't know, Andrew is one of the co-authors of the Ultimate Guide to Dropshipping book that was on Shopify, and obviously has a lot of dropshipping knowledge because of his businesses. So you were saying that the market, I'm not sure if you're saturated or not, but you were saying how it's harder to get into because of Amazon. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what does that mean? Yeah,
sure. So, and let me preface this by saying, again, I love dropshipping. I still own a dropshipping business that is a meaningful business, does well. And so it's definitely possible. It's definitely very viable. And there's some great advantages to having dropshipping. You don't know capital up front. You can work from anywhere. But it's getting more competitive. And I think to find a great dropshipping niche takes a lot more work than to find just a regular niche if you're manufacturing your own product. So in terms of dropshipping, and apologies, Felix, were you saying what are the criteria people should look at for a great niche? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Like if someone out there is listening wants to get started, and drop shipping, like you were saying, is low risk and something easy to get started in, but it's going to be harder to find the products that you should be selling. So give us an idea of how you would coach someone, I guess, to approach finding the right niche to drop ship in.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing, if you only take away one thing from kind of this little sub-conversation on dropshipping, is that if you're dropshipping, you've got to add value. You have to add meaningful value somewhere, because you're not adding it through manufacturing the product. You're not adding it through like a unique distribution channel, because most of the time, if you're dropshipping something, those suppliers are willing to drop for anyone else. So you have to, first and foremost, add information somewhere. For the niche we're in, radio equipment, the way we add value is through, it's inherently a confusing purchasing process. There's, to get one of our setups installed on a vehicle, it takes 6 or 7 components. It's not necessarily intuitive which one of those components are best for each vehicle. And for someone to go onto Amazon and try to put those together, they might be able to do it, but one, Amazon doesn't specialize in that. But even secondly, it's really difficult it's a lot of work to go through and put together a cart of 7 or 8 items on Amazon that you may or may not know are going to work together. So for us, our big advantage is informationally, is we help people with that buying uncertainty. So So that's the biggest one I look at. Information can be a huge way to add value in dropshipping. Some of the other things you want to look at is you want to look at niches that are accessory heavy, because margins on dropshipping are by default much lower than, say, manufacturing or even stocking your own products, because there's less barriers to entry. You don't have any risk up front. And so because of that, more people are in the game, and that drives the prices lower. So if you can find a niche where the majority of your revenue, or at least a good portion of it, is made up through multiple accessories, you'll be able to make more money, because somebody just comes, we sold trolling motors for a while, and those ended up selling that business. But the margins on those were tiny, like 10%. They were big ticket purchases, $1,000, and people would price shop like crazy for them. But with, like our radio business, people buy a radio, which we don't make very much money on. Those are maybe $100 radio. Where we make our money is on all the accessories that they purchase alongside it, like a $20 cable that has 100% markup, an antenna that has 100% markup, these kind of things. So they buy, 6, 7 items. We don't make any on the big ticket item. We make all of our money on the accessories. So having a lot of accessories is really helpful. Those are the two big ones. There's a bunch of other ones, like, for example, you have to, of course, be able to make sure you can find good quality suppliers, that hopefully you can find multiple suppliers, so you're not dependent on just one supply chain. A bunch of other things, but those are the two big ones I'd recommend people look at.
So you're saying before that, with dropshipping, it was a lot easier to get into previously because you were solving a distribution problem. Now that's no longer an issue. You have to find other ways to add meaningful value. And I think what you're getting at is that you now have to focus less on the product, because the product is something that anybody could sell if they can find the dropshipper that you're working with, but add value by either improving the experience, like how you guys are doing with improving the buyer experience, or providing content or education. Are there any other kind of angles that you think a dropshipping business can use to differentiate themselves from others?
Yeah, this isn't necessarily as much on the customer side, but on the marketing side, again, because your margins tend to be lower on the dropship side, it is harder to scale up these businesses with paid traffic. I'd say on average, dropshipping margins are probably 25% on the high side, probably more like 10%, maybe even high single digits on the low side. And so, using paid channels is difficult. AdWords, Facebook ads, you can do it, but it's tough. Mm-hmm. So if you can find a market where a dropshipping niche where there's the possibility for a lot of organic marketing, a lot of SEO marketing, a lot of word of mouth marketing, that's something that you can build up. And if you can build that up, it takes more of a long-term approach, but is definitely a bit of a moat that you can, if you're willing to put in the time, can help kind of protect your dropshipping business. Like our CB business, for example. Definitely there's someone who's really smart and ambitious who could come and compete with us, but it would be more difficult for them to do that and take longer, because we've got 8 years of SEO work and marketing work behind it, and I don't think you could compete with us buying the traffic. You'd have to do it organically, which is harder. So going back to, if you can look at a niche where CB radios was a little tough to market, but if you can look at a niche where either you have kind of an inside angle and can market it well, or just if you've just got great SEO or organic marketing chops, that can help a lot too. Yeah,
I was going to ask, is it harder or easier to defend your position or differentiate yourself when you are a dropshipper that's already kind of entrenched, like you're saying, 7-8 years into the business? Do you think that a business that wasn't a dropshipper would have an easier time with competition, or a harder time compared to your situation?
I think it depends on. So, are you asking if someone who wasn't a dropshipper, if it would be easier to compete if they stocked everything?
Yeah, like is that like a position that you think dropshippers want to move towards eventually, or can you stay and defend your position indefinitely as a dropshipper?
Yeah, okay, I got you. Good question. So it's easier if you can move up the value chain where instead of dropshipping, you're buying and bringing those products in-house. You can definitely compete more effectively, because usually your margins increase. If you're dropshipping, let's say your margin is 20%. If you buy it from the manufacturer in bulk, let's say you double it to 40%. So if that's the case, you can spend more on marketing. You can spend more to acquire a customer, and offer better pricing. There's a lot of reasons why on the marketing side and the pricing side, you can compete more effectively. So yeah, absolutely. It's easier to defend your position if the further you get to, being the manufacturer of the product, going from dropshipper to wholesaler to manufacturer. Unfortunately, we looked at that in the Right Channel Radios business, and this is something to think through too. if you do start a dropshipping business, the margin increase we get from stocking products is pretty negligible. It's unfortunate. So, instead of say doubling your margin, we get maybe a 5% cost savings for bringing everything in house. Which, at the end of the day, it just doesn't make sense to build a warehouse and staff it and everything.
Much riskier.
But, yeah.
Makes sense. So I want to go back to your pragmatic approach to finding a niche to sell in. So you were basically saying it's the pragmatic approach, and the other side, I think, is the passion-infused approach, where you focus on what you're passionate in, and you are the kind of customer that is your ideal customer already. So can you talk to us a little bit about the kind of pros and cons of the approach that you've taken, which is to look at it analytically rather than, the quote-unquote follow your passion, method?
Yeah, so pros of the analytical method are, I think you're more likely to succeed. You've got a better chance of actually building up a viable business. The cons, the biggest con is that it's going to be probably harder to be motivated. Especially in the early days, getting started. There were some brutal weeks of writing CB radio purchasing guides and sending hundreds of outreach emails to people with radio blogs that just were, soul sucking. And because I didn't really inherently care about it, I was driven by kind of an external force. So that's the downside. The nice thing is, and I still believe this is true, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially kind of just entrepreneurs at heart, they don't care as much about, it's not as crucial that they love what they're selling as much as they love the process of planning and executing and thinking through the problems and solving those problems and growing. They could be selling hula hoops or CB radios or, stocking caps, and it's all fun and games. So the other side, the passion side, is pretty much just the flip side of that. I mean, on the upside, you're probably more motivated, especially early on, to stick with something, to be able to, maybe you've got an informational advantage. You don't have to learn as much about it because it's something you've been interested in. On the downside, again, it's a lot of times I think with our passions, we, like anything that where emotion is involved, we can't necessarily see super clearly. You might be really excited about something and think that it's going to make a great business, but it doesn't, but you can't see that because you personally are so wrapped up in it. So I think that's the downside there. The holy grail of all of this, right, of course, is something that you're passionate about, and that is kind of the Venn diagram where those two intersect. But I think that's not impossible, but it is a tricky thing to find. If you can find it, oh man, I mean, congratulations, but it's not always possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. So one of the cons that you listed was just your experience of having to write all of this content for something that you weren't passionate about, or maybe you didn't know much about. So there's a big learning curve involved. I think there's going to be other listeners out there, other entrepreneurs that are in a similar situation where they have started a business and they are not the ideal customer, and they're taking this pragmatic approach that you're talking about. So how do you create content when you don't know anything about the industry, or you're not, passionate about the industry at that moment?
Yeah, great question. So for the radios, I did it in a number of ways. One, I called up the suppliers and annoyed the heck out of their salesmen. Once we got the account set up, I called them up and I chatted with them for, they probably regretted bringing me on as a client early on because I wasn't doing hardly any revenue and I was taking up a bunch of their time with questions. So grilling reps at your suppliers, and that's something where if you're evaluating a niche, getting a sense of how well your supplier reps know the product line is something that I put into like a kind of a little criteria sheet to think through. So that's one. Talking with customers. Just talking with customers, you learn a ton about stuff, and you got to be nimble and on your feet because a lot of times they ask you questions that you can't answer. But that's how you learn about your customer and the product. And sometimes you got to say, hey, you know what? I'm new here. I'm not sure about that. Let me find out and get back to you. And then you you hang up on the phone and you do some internet research. You call the supplier again if they're still accepting your calls, and get an answer and get back to them. And you slowly learn that way. Just ordering the product. I ordered, first thing I did when I started the business was ordered a radio and installed it on my own vehicle. I learned a lot that way. And online, it doesn't go for absolutely everything, but if you've got the discipline to do it, you can learn just about anything on the internet today. So just putting in the time to really do a deep dive on something that may not be as riveting as, the most recent blockbuster, but you can learn a lot if you've committed to just reading a lot of articles online.
Yeah, and the other, I think, important thing here is that when we approach, when as entrepreneurs, or marketers or content creators approach a project, either for their own store or for your blog, and you have to write about a topic you don't know much about, we sometimes think like, man, I got to become like a super expert so that no one thinks that don't know what I'm talking about. But surprisingly, you don't really have to. I'm not saying that you shouldn't educate yourself as much as possible, but you don't have to feel like you have to spend 3 or 4 years or whatever researching before you start putting out content. You just have to provide value, right? It doesn't have to position yourself as the extreme expert in some particular topic, as long as you're providing value. And I think as long as providing value consistently, I think it goes much further than someone that provides great value every once in a while. So I think that's an important point to make.
Yeah, I mean, if you spend 2 weeks researching something thoroughly, you're going to know more about it than 99% of the population. Even, and more know about it probably than 95% of the people who are in the market for what you're buying. So.
Yep, totally. And then while you are teaching it back out or, writing about it, then that just solidifies that knowledge even more within inside yourself. So you're not actually, wasting time creating content. You're actually learning more about your market. So it's definitely a worthy exercise to go through if you want to create content for an industry that you don't know much about yet. So I want to talk a little bit about your marketing. So you were saying before that, especially with dropshipping, PPC is hard. It doesn't seem like you guys spend too much time on social media. Has your business always been driven by organic, like just traffic from Google and SEO?
Primarily, yeah. I think we probably get 2/3 of our traffic through SEO, and then the remainder comes through kind of word of mouth advertising and website referrals. So yeah, it's very heavily driven, which I mean definitely has its pros and cons, which we can get into. But yeah, we're very heavy on the organic traffic side.
Yeah, so one thing I really like about the rightchannelradios.com website is that you have a whole section dedicated to guides. It's called the Learning Center. Is that where you put the most of your content? Is that where you guys create a lot of kind of SEO-driven content, or are there other parts of the website that really demonstrates your kind of content-heavy, SEO-heavy approach?
Yeah, that's the big one. So that's kind of where our technical resource library, where we really wanted to try to create a hub and a resource online that would be, one of, if not the definitive place to learn about how to install and select and troubleshoot radios for your vehicles. And so we did that there. But we also did a lot of, I'd say that definitely helps, especially I think the last 2-3 years with Google looking for quality content and weighing on-site stuff. But we also did a lot of outreach and a lot of third-party outreach early on in terms of donating products for reviews, in terms of guest posting, in terms of offering buyer's guides for websites, in terms of hosting and being a sponsor for different clubs, things like that kind of old school link building tactics. And we tried to do them in as white hat a way as possible. We weren't out there just buying a bunch of links. Fortunately, knock on wood, this could of course change. We haven't been hit with any major penalties on this site over the course of 8 years, but yeah, we did a lot on the SEO side. Offsite as well.
Is that a strategy that you think still works today, especially guest posting and donating products for reviews?
I think it can if you do it really carefully. I think, people say guest posting doesn't work and link building doesn't work. I disagree to some extent. I think it can still work, but again, you got to be really careful about how you do it. And I think before it was more of a numbers game, and today it's more of a authority and a quality game. So, going out and getting 10 links from some fantastic sites today is really the way to go versus trying to get links from 200 different sites that are lower quality 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think it can still work. I wouldn't base an entire SEO marketing plan around product giveaways and guest posting, but I think supplemented and done smartly. I think it can help still.
Cool. So I want to talk about your other business. So 2008 was when you started Right Channel Radios, and you started another business shortly after that. Can you tell us a little bit about that one and we'll start there? So
the idea behind that was after starting Right Channel Radios, just wanted to start a second business to, just kind of the classic entrepreneurial curse of wanting to do more things than just the one thing you're focused on. So took the same kind of pragmatic approach, really focused on just trying to pick something that we thought would be a viable niche and pick trolling motors, move forward with it. And I think we launched that in 2012. 2010 is when we started that business.
And were you able to use any of the marketing, maybe email lists or whatever you built up with Right Channel Radios to help launch Trolling Motors?
No, and that probably was a mistake. It probably would have been a better idea to leverage what we had built, but it was completely from scratch. No, there wasn't a lot of overlap in terms of customers or connections or anything.
Mm-hmm. So one of the, I guess, first ways I found out about you and your business and e-commerce fuel was through probably one of your most popular blog posts, which was your open book sale of your $600,000 store talking about trollingmotors.net. So maybe we'll start with what was the reason why you wanted to sell the business?
It had to do with a couple of things. One, it was, of the three things I was doing at the time, it was probably the one that didn't make the most sense to focus on, didn't have the best opportunities. And so I wanted to sell it because it was, more or less, I wanted to focus on my other two businesses. Secondly, I thought it would be a great experience to sell a business. It's something I wanted to do to be able to have an exit. And third, I thought it would make for some potentially interesting content on e-commerce fuel on the blog. So for all those reasons, decided to sell it.
Mm-hmm. So what was the process like? What did you work? Did you sell it privately? Did you go through some agency to work it out? Or tell us a little about what it's like to sell a store.
Yeah, so I did it in a very unorthodox manner. Most people will sell it on their own or use a business broker to sell their business. And I did it with a reverse auction. So what I did is I pretty much opened up I threw out a blog post that said, hey, here's the business, here are the financials, talked about everything. I'm selling the business and it is priced. Here's the price. And I will, it's reverse auction. So most auctions, you have bidders who they raise the price, right? Like someone bids $10,000, the next person bids, $11,000, and the highest bidder gets it. Well, I wanted to create kind of a sense of urgency to buy the business. And so I did a reverse auction, which the price starts high and then it drops, and the first person to make a bid at the current price gets to buy the business. And so that's the approach that it took. A little bit unorthodox, but that's the one I went with.
So what happens after the sale? How do you transition all of it? For anybody out there that's either thinking about buying a store or selling theirs, tell us about the process of handing things off. And is it a smooth transition? Like what kind of things you gotta look out for when you are handing off a business that you just sold?
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of moving parts. So I think one thing to be careful of is, especially if you're running multiple businesses, it's very easy to have a lot of overlap. So for example, like our ticketing system at the time was serving both of our e-commerce stores. Our hosting was serving both e-commerce stores. And so when I sold it and I had to get ready to transition it, I had to create a brand new hosting account and transfer my site there. I had to break off and start a new Zendesk account and set everything up again for the new store. All these different things that you don't really think about, and you can definitely save money if you're doing it on your own, but when it comes time to transferring businesses, it's an absolute nightmare to try to do that. So that would be one thing I'd be careful of if you're thinking about, if you ever think you might divest a property, try to keep it, if you can, in its own little island. That's really helpful. But yeah, the process, I think we went over under LOI, which means somebody bid on the site and signed what's called a letter of intent to buy it. I think in early December, I think late November 20th, 25th. And we had closed the deal by January 19th after, doing all the diligence, signing the asset purchase agreement. So it takes about, a couple month process to get it done. And
is it pretty much like wipe your hands clean, or is there a kind of, and I'm not sure how similar your situation is to other sales, but were you required to be a part of the business for a certain amount of time with the transition, or like you're saying in January you finished the sale and then that was it? They're off on their own and you're off on your own?
Yeah, no, good question. Usually with most sales, there's a transition period, and it varies based on the owners, the complexity of the business, a lot of things. For ours, it was definitely helped him out for a couple months. So, maybe 6 weeks. The first week, of course, you're helping out a lot. You're showing him how things run. You're really walking him through things and helping out a lot. And over time that fades. So I'd say, by the time 2 months had gone by, I'd hear from him maybe, very occasionally, maybe every month or so. And then by the time, 4 months had gone by, I almost never heard from him. So usually a transitionary period, which you negotiate how in depth and how involved that's going to be. And a lot of times people like commit to a certain number of hours that they can help with. But it usually for the most part it's up, and for me at least was after a month was mostly finished.
Awesome. So I want to talk now about probably your second most popular blog post that I've read, which is about your migration from Magento to Shopify. So tell us a little bit about the decision. Like, why did you decide to make that move?
Yeah, it was, the biggest reason was, there's a couple of reasons. The first one was I was just getting sick of being on Magento, because it's, as any Magento store owner will probably attest to, it's very powerful. You can customize the heck out of it, but it's got a fairly high technical workload involved in terms of upgrades, in terms of keeping everything running properly. And I'm just barely competent enough to try to tackle it myself, but so poor at technical issues like system admin and PHP that it takes me forever, and I just got tired of it. So I wanted to go to a hosted solution. Shopify was my the one I liked the best, and also to a lesser degree, mobile traffic was becoming an issue. I definitely could have just used a new theme on our Magento installation to get a mobile site up and running a little bit more effectively, but when you migrate platforms, that's a great time to redesign anyway. And so I just figured I'd kill a couple birds with one stone. Yeah,
you did mention that it wasn't just a move from Magento to Shopify, but you were going to invest $50,000 into a complete overhaul. Tell us a little bit about that breakdown, because I think that's obviously a large sum of money, but if someone else out there wants to spend something like that, or maybe a fraction of that, what can you do with $50,000 to overhaul your entire brand and your business?
Yeah, so 30,000 of that roughly was developer fees and design fees. We used a great company, Carson McComas over at fuelmade.com, a great guy, and he did a killer job for us. So about 30K of that was development design, and then 20,000 was kind of just payroll expenses. My team was pretty heavily involved in terms of kind of building out, writing new copy for all the products, getting some new pictures and photography, really revamping the technical library that you talked about. So you can see kind of the before and after if you go to that blog post. Maybe we can link that up in the show notes. Yeah. But we were able to get a brand new design, a brand new logo, really a fairly involved kind of selection wizard on our website. If you go to our website right now, you can pick your make and model of your vehicle, and it'll automatically spit out which one of our components work well. Kind of a really cool shipping calculator on the cart side that was built custom for us that says, kind of like Amazon does, it says, hey, if you order this in the next 2 hours, it will arrive on X date. So it was a fairly definitely a decent chunk of change, but you can get a lot for that. So
yeah, did you know that the investment was going to pay off? Again, listeners out there might not be investing this much money into a complete overhaul, but I know a lot of entrepreneurs, on Shopify, they think about doing even simpler things like paying for a custom theme or paying a developer or designer to overhaul their entire website, and maybe several $1,000s that could be spent somewhere else. Is there a way to determine if it's going to be a worthy return on your investment to focus on things like design and overhauling a website?
Yeah, really good question. And the thought process, I'd say if someone's thinking about it, if they've got an established business that's generating some reasonable revenues, and they have a very specific reason for why they want to do a redesign, and a custom redesign can help them solve some of those problems they may be having, that's a great time to start thinking seriously about it. I'd say for people, if you don't have a business that's doing substantial amount of revenue, or if you don't necessarily have any specific problems or UX issues or things that you're trying to address with your redesign, that probably at that point you're probably better served with just a stock theme, because there's a bunch of beautiful stock themes out there that are going to be way more cost effective than trying to custom hire someone to do what you're trying to do. We had a couple different UX things we were trying to accomplish. We wanted to invest more in branding, and the business had been up and running and stable for a while in terms of kind of revenue and profitability. So yeah, that's kind of how I'd look at that one. In terms of thinking through more specifically if we knew the investment would pay off, like anything, you don't know if it will, but kind of the thought experiment I did as I went through, and we had one of the reasons we did it was 2013, we had a great year. 2014, our year was terrible. Our revenues dropped by 30%, largely based on the mobile issue. And so we wanted to do the custom design because, one, there was some specific user interface things that we wanted to address. Our whole value add, kind of like what we talked about earlier with dropshipping, is really being incredible about guiding people through that purchasing process. And so we wanted to add some custom things that could help do that more effectively. But yeah, you make some assumptions. You say, okay, well, $50,000. If we don't make this redesign, what is the future going to look like in terms of the increase, in terms of the profit from the business, and also the value of the business? If we do the redesign and make some basic assumptions, and I had done a couple of redesigns in the past, so I had a rough idea of what was feasible. You say, okay, well, maybe this redesign, we think it'll increase our profitability, let's say, 30%. Okay, so what does that translate into in terms of, increased dollars on an ongoing basis? And also, if we decided we ever want to sell the business, this is something I think most store owners a lot of times don't think about. How much of a difference would that make in the sale price? So you can say, well, if we do increase the profitability of the business by 30%, obviously you can get 30% more for the business, but your multiple you will get will probably also be larger because you're stopping a sinking ship, so to speak. And so yeah, you definitely run the numbers, but there's no hard, no surefire way to understand if it's going to work apart from just going through with it.
Yeah, well, one thing you said was about how you want to only consider doing this if you are trying to solve a specific user experience problem. And I think it's important to talk about this a little bit, because how do you know if they're actual problems versus you kind of making up problems and then deciding to try and go and fix them? Because I think this also happens a lot where entrepreneurs are held back because they think, okay, I can't launch it because this problem exists, but in reality, it might not be an actual problem at all, at least not a problem preventing sales. So can you talk about that? How do you decide whether something is an actual problem versus a problem made up by the entrepreneur?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest way for us was just doing old-fashioned user testing. We used usertesting.com, and probably the easiest one to point out, I think I mentioned this on the blog post too, was we ran some user tests, and we hired people to come to our site and shop for their vehicle. Just said, hey, pick out a CB radio for your vehicle. We picked from a pool of people that had off-road rigs and trucks, and so we knew they were kind of in our demographic, and watched them go through the process. And almost all of the user tests we saw, they'd come to our site, they'd land on our site, and they'd say, hey, how come there's not like a little wizard here, like on kellybluebook.com, where I can say, hey, here's my make and model of my vehicle and year, and get recommendations? Like that's what I'm used to doing. That's what I want to do, but it's not here. And so almost immediately we thought, okay, this is going to be a core part of our redesign, because everyone, that's just what they are looking for based on these tests that we've done. So I think to answer your question, I think user testing is really the only way to know, because yeah, you're right. A lot of times the stuff that we think is important may or may not be. Yeah,
I like that you actually went out, and I think you said you used usertesting.com?
Yep, usertesting.com.
Okay, yeah, definitely. There's that one. I think there are others out there too. I think it's really important to not make just blind assumptions, but actually, test to see if they are actual UX problems before you invest thousands or hundreds of dollars into changing things on your site. Not just because it's money that could go somewhere else, but then all of your attention and everything, there's also kind of being wasted on the wrong things. So I want to talk about your day-to-day now, what it's like running a store. So obviously, you have e-commerce fuel, you have your drop shipping site, and how do you kind of spend your days? Like, when you wake up in the morning, how do you decide what you spend your time doing?
Yeah, it really depends. When we were doing the big redesign on Right Channel, it was probably 80% working on the e-commerce business for a period of probably 6 months. Recently, it's been more working on e-commerce fuel, working on all sorts of stuff. Our private community, it's a kind of, like you mentioned, it's a kind of a private community for 6- and 7-figure vetted store owners, and so working on all sorts of things related to that in terms of improving our website, or creating content for the podcast or blog posts, or organizing an event that we do every year, e-commerce fuel live, or welcoming new members, things like that. And I try to break up my day. Usually in the mornings, I can have a to-do list. I fill it every night, and on the top of that, I have the one item, the one important, non-urgent but important long-term item I'm trying to work on. So it could be like today, for example, it was crafting an email series for people that apply for our community, but don't, they have a great application, they meet our criteria, but for whatever reason, they don't finish the application process. And so following up with them. So try to carve out the mornings for really important strategic work. And then the afternoons, I try to do things like, get to email, phone calls, things that are less important, but you still have to do, like, regulatory stuff, just the little things that are essential. So that's kind of how my days and years look.
So do you have a team that helps you run these businesses, or is it all by yourself? Like what is I guess the e-commerce fuel and the rightchannelradios.com team look like?
Yeah, blessed to have a really, really great team. So on the Right Channel side, I have kind of a similar structure for both. For both businesses, I have kind of one person stateside that's kind of the operations or the kind of the day-to-day person that. So I have someone on the radio business side based out of Montana that runs operations, answers phone calls, deals with customers, orders, all that kind of stuff. And then working with him is a virtual assistant that kind of that also tag teams that. And then on the e-commerce fuel side, same thing. So we have a full-time community manager. Her name's Laura Serino, and she helps out with the community. She helps out with the podcast, organizing events, a lot of different things. And she kind of handles the day-to-day, just keeping the trains running for that business, as well as she has a virtual assistant that helps her with that as well. So,
So this is I feel like not necessarily a common path, but definitely a path that I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs kind of follow, which is that they've successfully started a business like you have done, and then transition to creating content around their experience. And for you, it's e-commerce fuel, the podcast, website, the community, and kind of transition into that direction as well. And you definitely have built a business around. And I think other entrepreneurs are thinking about taking their experiences and then also building websites and blogs, and eventually maybe turning that into a business as well. So for someone that has a successful business and is looking to kind of head in this direction, how did you get started? How do you get started building an audience based around teaching your experiences?
For me, when I got started, the biggest thing I wanted to do was you just hit on it. Build an audience first. So I think if you come out of the gates and you have 2 blog posts, and one of them is the Hello World blog post that's built into WordPress, and you start offering a course, that's a tough sell, right? Unless you're the world's best copywriter. So first year I started e-commerce fuel, I focused almost exclusively on just writing quality articles, trying to connect with people, trying to help people. I wrote, the way I kicked off the whole blog was I just spent 2 weeks in a cabin in the woods and wrote a book. It's called Profitable E-commerce, that I gave away for free. That I think it was, maybe I'm slightly biased, but I think I probably got charged $50, $100 for it. But I just gave it away because I wanted to use it as a way to build credibility and build my audience. So I think it's building credibility, building an audience by writing and helping people first, and then figuring out what kind of things that they need and being able to help add value once you get to that point.
Yeah, it's definitely it's one of those things where it's a pretty simple steps you have to take, but does require a lot of work. So it's not a complex kind of path. As long as you're providing value, paying attention to the community that you're building, you'll know where they'll kind of lead you in the right direction. But it just requires a lot of work. Like you're saying, 2 weeks straight of writing, I think would kill me. So I think congratulate you on doing that. Cool. So maybe close this out. Let's talk about some of your favorite things. What are some of the apps and tools you use to run your business?
Apps and tools. I use Asana. That's kind of what we use for our internal knowledge base and kind of task tracking. Skype, of course. Use Help Scout and Zendesk. What else? Let me grab my phone just a second.
Let's take a look.
All right, use Evernote. I'm kind of an Evernote newbie, but definitely use that. The Shopify app gets opened quite a bit. Let's see, what else we got here.
Any Shopify specific apps that you use?
You mean like plugins for Shopify?
Yeah, those as well. I think a lot of listeners love hearing about what other stores use just to check it out themselves.
Yeah, we don't use too many. We use one that is we use Yotpo. We use a map disclosure. This is an app developed by my brother, but it's cool and I love it. We have it on our site. It's an order map, and it shows like your orders of your customers in real time. So you can customize it and it'll show like who ordered, and where they ordered from in the last week on your website. We use that. That's kind of cool.
What's the name of that app?
It's called Simple Map. And the website is simplemaps.com. So we use Simple Map. We use the Klaviyo plugin, traffic control to deal with 404s, Directed Edge for product recommendations, order lookup, which lets people look up their order stats without logging in. Those are the big ones.
Cool. And are there any books or blogs that you think were the most helpful to helping you on your entrepreneurial journey and just your business?
Well, I think early on, the guys at StomperNet, like the old school SEO and online marketing training program, those are the guys that I cut my teeth on marketing with. So I don't think they're around anymore, but they definitely helped me get my start. Today, people I read a lot. Definitely read the Shopify blog. I read Steve Chu's blog over at mywifequitherjob.com, Drew Sanaki's blog over at nerdmarketing.com. I read Ecom Crew by Michael Jackness and his co-founder over there. Jason Retail Geek Goldberg over at retailgeek.com. He's got he writes a little bit more from a larger enterprise perspective, but has a lot of great stuff over there. The Moz blog, enjoy the Moz blog. Those are probably the big ones for work and e-commerce that I follow on a regular basis.
Awesome. So what's in store for the remainder of this year, remainder of 2016? What kind of, big term goals that you wanted to hit by end of the year?
Yeah, so I'd like to really get a product that we've been developing in-house. It's on the market right now, and we're just in the very, very early phases of trying to build up, really market it more or less. So I'd like to get that. It's our first proprietary product. It's a vehicle organizer that we built, and so I want to get that to the point where it's generating some meaningful revenue, and really more or less, more than anything, learn how to the ins and outs of manufacturing a product, importing it, selling it, kind of moving beyond dropshipping. So that's a big goal. We've got e-commerce Fuel Live coming up in Savannah for all of our private forum members, all of our community members, and that should be fun. It'll be our third annual event. Looking forward to doing that. Hopefully looking forward to doing some travel and some adventures with the family. And those are and kind of add in a couple of things we'd like to do for the e-commerce Fuel community. Move over to some more advanced form software, as well as build out a really robust tool for being able to talk about and review platforms and carts and tools that e-commerce merchants use. So right now we've got, in our community, we've got tons of discussions on everything from, Shopify, BigCommerce, and Yotpo, all the apps and carts that people use, but they're kind of scattered everywhere. And one thing we want to build out by the end of the year is a platform that leverages Built With. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a really cool app. And so create a platform that goes out, scans all of our members' stores, detects what their technology is, and consolidates that. So, for example, if you want to learn about Yotpo, you can go to a page in our community, and it'll say, hey, here are the 150 members that use Yotpo. Here are all the discussions on Yotpo in the community right now. And so it's just a way where you can really quickly not only see everything with Yotpo in one place, but you can find what store owners are using it and get real world feedback on it within kind of people that you trust inside. So yeah, that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm excited to roll out this year.
Yeah, I love that idea. So thanks so much, Andrew. So rightchannelradios.com is the e-commerce store. ecommercefuel.com is the website and the community. And e-commerce fuel podcast, search down iTunes for Andrew's podcast. Anything else or anywhere else that you recommend the listeners go and check out? They want to follow along with what you're doing?
Just, on Twitter at Youderian, Youderian, or at e-commerce fuel. Between that and the blog and the podcast, do a podcast like you mentioned as well. Just the e-commerce fuel podcast. You can Google it or go e-commerce fuel in iTunes. Those are the places I hang out. So
awesome. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Felix. Appreciate it. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to Shopify Masters, the e-commerce marketing podcast for ambitious entrepreneurs. To start your store today, visit shopify.com for a free 14-day trial.